Let's go ahead and get started. I am excited tonight to welcome you to our first of several sessions in our new series at the Friday Institute called Real Issues, Real Data. And the genesis behind this was really for us to be able to talk about issues that we're reading in the headlines, for us to understand how things are happening in education and what research and data says about that, and how we can learn from that research and data to inform our practices as well. So I'm excited about our first topic, generative AI and computer science. We're hearing a lot about both of those topics in North Carolina and in other places across the country, but it's really important for us to think about, in the future, is there going to be a case where computer science becomes obsolete? And so that was kind of our guiding question as we thought about this topic and what we wanted to bring to you tonight. Just to give you a little bit about what we do here at the Friday Institute, we are really about research, policy, and practice. I love working in this environment where we can think about how all of those three pieces come together and can make a difference on student learning and have an impact on the classroom in really positive, meaningful ways. So I want to share with you two of our experts from the Friday Institute tonight, Dr. Jose Picart, who when he talks about research, it's really interesting how he's able to explain the work that we do and how we lead is thinking about empowering teachers and students. And so it's not a standalone thing that's happening in a silo at NC State University. It's about how research can empower others so that we can work successfully together and collectively. And so we really, as all former educators ourselves, love that connection to the classroom. And my heart is that of a teacher and a school librarian always. And so I really appreciate that as a leading expert in our institution to be able to think about research in that kind of way. And then also from Dr. Callie Edwards, who is our Director of Strategic Initiatives and leads a lot of our evaluation at the Friday Institute with various organizations. This is not something that happens in silos, but it's very symbiotic instead, where we're learning from educators, we're learning from our partners, where we can collaborate and understand the problems that folks are facing in the classrooms and schools and districts, identify those things that exist there, those needs, what's of interest to them, and then from that exploration and research, able to help guide those different pathways that can be envisioned for a new reality in a new classroom. So that's part of how we want to frame our discussion tonight, that this is really about exploring and understanding, hearing from experts in the field about what this topic looks like for them and what they're thinking about and what they're researching. I am going to turn it over to my two colleagues at the Friday Institute, Russell Strand-Poole and Jackie Stevens, to get us started with our topic. And so I'll turn it to them. Thanks so much, folks.
Yes, thank you, Emma. I don't know if Emma got a chance to introduce herself. Emma Broughton is the Director of Digital Learning at the Friday Institute. And Russell and I are really excited to be here as we facilitate this first of many important discussions in the Real Issues, Real Data series. For those of you joining us, we have created a guide not only highlighting our panelists, but also sharing with you the resources that are going to be talked about tonight so that you can continue the conversation in your respective schools or organizations. And you can access that document at go.ncsu.edu/GenAICS. This link's going to be added to the chat for easy access. So one of the things why this issue, we're actually going to put a poll out to you, our audience, to ask you what questions that you have when it comes to this question. Will generative AI make computer science education obsolete? It's more important today than ever before because we are at this pivotal moment in the evolution of technology and education. As generative AI continues to advance at this unprecedented pace, it challenges the traditional models of teaching and learning, particularly in the field of computer science. So this discussion is crucial because it's prompting us to consider the implications of AI, not just as a tool, but as a potential disruptor. So we must explore whether these innovations are going to augment or enhance our educational practices, or if they might render certain aspects of computer science education redundant. So the answers we seek today are definitely going to help us prepare for the future, where the role of educators, students, and technology will inevitably shift. So to set the stage for our conversation, I'd like to turn things over to my co-facilitator, Russell.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So, why are we having this conversation now? With the widespread adoption of generative artificial intelligence, several people have begun to question what tasks, roles, and jobs may soon be automated by generative AI tools. We have already seen numerous AI generated images, articles, and even music across the internet. Generative AI has also become part of advertisement through Facebook and other outlets. And as we look towards the future, though, the question becomes what else might be replaced by these AI tools? At a World Government Summit in Dubai, the NVIDIA CEO argued that over the course of the last 10, 15 years, almost everyone who sits on a stage like this would tell you it is vital for our children to learn computer science. Everyone should learn how to program. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. And it is true that even today, businesses, computer scientists, and software engineers are using tools such as Copilot to help check, debug, and even write small snippets of code. However, this statement challenges much of the ongoing work nationwide to teach computer science and make it a graduation requirement for our students. So the question is whether we should continue to teach students computer science in schools, or should we focus students' attention on different skills and leave the programming to generative AI? So before we dive into the conversation, though, we need to define what computer science is so we understand what students will be giving up without learning about the topic. When we speak about the field of computer science, we are talking about more than just coding. Computer science education also includes computational thinking, cybersecurity, digital citizenship, as well as creativity. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Jacqueline Stevens, who will introduce our panelists.
Yes, to dig in further, we have here, we're honored to have our three distinguished panelists join us, each bringing unique expertise and perspectives to our discussion on generative AI and its impact on computer science education. I will briefly introduce you, and after adding a little bit about telling folks about you, feel free to add on to all of the background and expertise. So we have first on my list here, we have Crystal Chapman. She is a seasoned educator and technology enthusiast of over 15 years. As a professional learning and community manager at the Computer Science Teachers Association, she supports educator community building to improve learning outcomes for students. Her roles as a member of the Engage AI Practitioner Advisory Board, CSTA Equity Fellow Alum, and president of the CSTA Mississippi chapter further underscores her dedication to equitable computer science and AI implementation in education. She's a co-founder of the AI Collaborative and is committed to developing an equitable AI ecosystem across Mississippi and beyond. Through her affiliations, she has created and led one of the first educator fellowships for AI and co-organized Mississippi's first AI conference. Crystal's influence extends nationwide, from the White House to Silicon Valley, where she has shared insights on AI and the critical importance of computer science education. A passionate advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility for all, she's committed to empowering individuals through technology. Welcome, Crystal.
Hello, hello. Thank you for that great introduction and welcome everyone. I'm excited to be able to have this conversation because it is definitely one that I've been asked repeatedly about my feelings. And so what I like to, I guess, phrase what I do is just support educators in computer science learning spaces to build community. There we go, mixing up my words. And so there's so much that we know as educators as we need, and a lot of it truly is each other. and feeling like we have the support to do this really, really difficult job. And so that's one of the things that I'm so excited about that I'm able to do across multiple organizations. And so I'm excited for our conversation that we're going to have today.
Next, we have Mahmoud Harding, who is Instructional Design Director at Data Science for Everyone, a nonprofit coalition committed to enhancing data science education for all K-12 students. Before assuming this role, he taught mathematics and data science at the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics, where he co-developed both introductory and advanced courses in data science using R and Python. Additionally, Mahmoud currently teaches introductory R and Python for data science at the Data Science Academy at NC State University, where he worked with others to make contributions to the development of the course. Thanks for joining us, Mahmoud.
Thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to be able to be a part of this conversation. The majority of the work that I do focuses on making sure that teachers are prepared to introduce their content area using data and data-enabled instruction. That includes being able to source data, being able to look at the ethical impacts of data, and also being able to use tools to manipulate data to help their students derive insight, to make suggestions, to solve complicated problems.
And we have Kelly joining us. Kelly Schuster Paredes is a middle school computer science teacher with over 25 years of classroom experience. She's the co-host of Teaching Python podcast, where she shares practical insights and advice on teaching coding. Kelly specializes in making computer science accessible and engaging for students of all ages. In addition to her podcast, Kelly leads professional development for teachers, advises on the use of AI, privacy and safety, and other tech tools. She's organized and co-hosted the Educational Summit at PyCon for 3 years, and she is passionate about ethical technology use, just-in-time learning, and practical problem-solving skills. Kelly also runs a blog focused on teaching in Python and is an active member of the Python community, continually learning and growing in the field. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great introduction and a great segue to just say, part of the reason why I love being here is being that extra person in the room. As teachers, we're kind of alone, especially as computer science teachers. We don't have a great sounding board sometimes. Usually there's only one of us in that school. So I love this opportunity to be able to be that third, fourth, fifth person in the room, and just to be there for a voice for us teachers dealing with the issue of AI and computer science.
Wonderful. So we're going to start our discussion with our first question. This question will be asked of all of our panelists. What is your overall reaction to the issue of generative AI in computer science education? And I'm going to start with Kelly for this question.
Oh, good. I'm glad being first. So generative AI, it's in the classroom myself and dealing with it, it presented really cool opportunities and also very significant challenges for us in the classroom. As we started to teach with it, we found more editors with generative AI. It posed the fact that it could greatly enhance learning. It made coding more accessible. It really helped the kids and students and myself become more creative. It did allow students to really dive in and solve complex problems. But on the other hand, we were constantly, or we still are, constantly concerned about over-reliance on AI tools, undermining their understanding of the fundamentals of coding, just like when math teachers were afraid of the fundamentals of math going away when the calculator came out. So we're constantly in flux on a seesaw. Yes, use it, no, use it. And so exciting and scary all at the same time. But we want to always make sure that we're integrating the AI thoughtfully and ensuring it's a tool to complement rather than replace the deep learning and the critical thinking that comes out in computer science.
Wonderful. I'm next going to turn to Mahmoud for this question.
So the overall thought that I have, coming from a background of mathematics and computer science, and having taught computer science in the early 90s in high school when it was Pascal and Fortran. And there's a significant learning curve for students who aren't immersed or they don't have opportunities to play with technology early on in their academic career to become used to things breaking and not working and fixing them, to only have a new release that then breaks and doesn't work and you have to fix it. So you have to train that muscle. So what I think about with AI is that it really depends on the instructional goals of that particular class.
Mhm.
If your instructional goals are to use a particular piece of computer science that doesn't require the student to do deep thought, which, if they struggle with it, will prevent them from reaching the cognitive space where you want them to be, then it's absolutely a useful tool. For example, I teach an introductory course in R and Python, and it's for novice programs. So I don't want them to be in a space where the frustration overtakes them. So we use it to get us started. But in the process of getting started, we then go back to make sure that we understand why we're doing what we're doing and what outcomes we can expect. And I always tell them, if you are doing this class to get a feel for what data science can be in R and Python, AI to help you get through this course is perfectly suitable. But if you're going to be a full-time data scientist or a full stack engineer, you're going to have to go beyond it. So I think, as Kelly said, thoughtful integration is the key.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And now I'm going to turn it to Crystal.
Yes, so I think that some of my thoughts will echo what has already been said, but I will say, just thinking about the quote of the CEO, whenever we're asking people to not learn or not use their brains, I get really concerned because that's kind of important that we use these things. And so I'm back and forth sometimes on how I feel depending on specifically what we're kind of discussing. Of course, using generative AI and AI in learning spaces offers the opportunity to close some of the gaps that we often discuss when it comes to learning, when it comes to access, when it comes to, as Mahmoud just mentioned, giving that introductory step into learning something, that could be complex in higher level courses. But where I pause and have a lot of hesitancy is when we're talking about equity and access to these tools. As he literally just mentioned, some students don't have the opportunity to have the training wheels with technology tools and practice the iterative process and become comfortable with the failure that kind of happens. And so when we throw students into that a little bit later, the results may become, or their tendency may become, to be a little more reliant and look for these tools, these platforms to give them the answer because they assume that they're incorrect. And so that's the type of thinking and learning that, we don't want with our students. Not to mention that when we're talking about how some of these tools can cause harm more so than really, really benefit students when it comes to how they work or the inherent algorithmic biases that we know exist in technology. And so I'm definitely back and forth. It just kind of depends. It truly, truly is with the educator and how they want to use the tool is really how it shines. I've worked with educators across the country, and one in particular always comes to mind, a US history teacher that was hesitant because she had concerns about plagiarism. And after, we talked and we worked through some ideas, she was able to offer an opportunity for her students to use some tools in some spaces. And she had phenomenal output because, the standard she was assessing was not necessarily their ability to generate particular ideas. Right. So in cases like that, sure, great. But when we're really trying to get down to the bottom of how these tools work, my concern sometimes lies in data and what's happening with our students' data. And then also, if it works for one student and it doesn't work for another, how do we work to, number one, of course, eliminate that issue, but how do we work to support students dealing with that issue? And that's, one of the major things that I'm always thinking about.
I love all three of your points. I love, Mahmoud, how you spoke to the desire of a teacher or educator to introduce students to these tools and how important that is. That they need that experience early on, and they need it through a educated, guided experience done by a teacher so that they understand the proper way of using these tools. And all of us, or all of you, seem to speak to that idea, this seesaw, or this back and forth on whether or not we use these tools and how we use these tools in the classroom. I believe a lot of folks, a lot of teachers are struggling with this idea right now in their classes on whether or not they use it. And if they do use it, how do they use it to make sure it's beneficial to the students? So I'm going to hand it back over to Jacqueline for our second question.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start with you, Mohammed, because you mentioned that your experience teaching novice programmers. So have we reached a point where generative AI can replace the human element in computer science? Or is there a strong argument for retaining the human element?
I'm going to be very biased because I'm a teacher. And so my algorithm is going to say we need the human experience. And having experience teaching novice programmers, one of the issues that generative AI poses for them is that they don't have the experience to discern if the response is useful. Just because you get a response doesn't mean that it solves the problem that you're trying to deal with. And also, it doesn't mean it solves it efficiently. And you need to have some way to do a check and balance. And what I have seen is that students who come into this course, even though it's designed for novice programmers of R or Python or novice programmers in general, if they've had any background in programming, the AI tool sort of propels them in a way that it doesn't for the brand new programmer. And an example that I'd like to give is sort of like cooking, right? I can't really cook really well, but I can make spaghetti because I can go get ragu sauce from the store and put it on ground beef. But I'm not a chef. So a chef could even take that same ragu and add things to it and cook it in a way that it won't taste like my spaghetti. And so there's a point, and I have no idea what that point is. There's a point of foundational knowledge that you have to have. And I strongly believe this. I think it's a must. There's a must that there's a point where you must have certain elements of foundational knowledge before the generative AI tools, in specifically programming, propel you to become faster and more efficient. And when we rely on people who are in the space of programming, I have nothing against NVIDIA or the CEO, but a person with 30 years of experience in technology forgot what it was to first learn it. He can't remember. It's like, I don't remember what it was like to learn how to ride a bike, but I can ride it now. And it just seems easy. And this person is in a space that's very different than education. Education doesn't move the same way that technology moves. Technology moves fast, it's nimble. Education is about a slow process because we're trying to retrain the brain to think about something that it never thought about before, and then use that thing to solve problems that it never thought about solving. So that's what that's my reaction to the idea that generative AI will replace humans, because that piece in the education sector has to be a human piece. It can't be a machine piece.
Thank you. And I'll hop over to Kelly. Kelly, what are your thoughts on, can generative AI replace the human element in computer science, or is a strong argument for retaining the human element?
We were just talking about this today about the 3 R's and rigor, relevance, and relationships. Rigor and relevance, sure, you could train an AI to give rigor and to adapt to a student's abilities. You can train it with its RAG memory and really push it to give out the information that you want, and it's going to have relevance. But it's going to be difficult at this moment in this current time with AI to have a relationship with a student. And if we take the spectrum of students and we sort of phase out those innate learners, those learners that are going to go to YouTube, are going to go to ChatGPT, are going to figure things out, that are going to read everything that's in front of them And then the other side, we're just going to put those over here for a second. And we just talk about that middle line. Those students in the middle line need a reason sometimes to learn. They need a connection in order to learn. They don't want to stare at a computer and just have it regurgitate something. There has to be a relationship built to sometimes encourage and provide the right mindset for those learners that don't really know if they want to learn coding. My biggest push is getting, girls and the underrepresented groups to code. When I go to PyCon, not so much anymore. It's getting a little bit better, but when I go to PyCon, I'm one of 50 people in the conference, and I want to see more of that. So we have to have that relationship in education that a bot doesn't always give. So a lot of things that Mahmoud says, I completely agree with, and that relationship part.
Thank you.
I actually love what both of you were saying, Mahmoud, especially about how that CEO doesn't remember a time when they were learning to code. The kind of intimidation that a lot of students will face when entering into a computer science classroom, especially if it, for many of my students, they had not signed up for my class, they had just been put in. And I could only imagine the intimidation of as you were saying, Kelly, a female student who goes into a classroom and is just thinking to themselves, why am I learning this? This is already hard. I don't belong. I can just have AI do it for me. So both of those were fantastic points.
And Crystal, what are your thoughts on the human element when it comes to generative AI?
I mean, I think the simplest way I can state it is you can't take people out of a people-centric field. Education is person-centered, right? Whether we're talking about the students or whether we're talking about the educators or whoever, it is about the relationships like Kelly just said. And so when we're thinking about all the things we do as educators, there's only a small portion that actually has to do with content instruction. We spend the majority of our time in the classroom spaces learning our students, building relationships with them so they can trust us. So when we get to the hard stuff, we're able to push through, together. And so at this moment in time where technology is today, machines are not able to give that same level of comfort. And one thing I often think about is some of the struggle that our learners had when the first onset of the pandemic, and everyone had to go home and get on a device, and how many students were just challenged with not being in a room with other people. And so it's kind of like, we saw that was not successful for everyone, and yet we're trying to kind of push that again. And it's concerning because once again, we do more than just give students information to regurgitate back to us. And I think that when we're talking about whether or not it's possible today, it's not, because I've tried with some generative AI tools to I guess elicit a little bit emotion and support just to see if it would actually work. It did not work. So with that being said, not yet, not today. Hopefully not super too soon, but you never know what the future may hold when it comes to the advancement of generative AI.
Thank you. So our next question, and I'm going to throw it your direction, Kelly. Do generative AI tools have a place in computer science education? And what are the philosophical implications of incorporating these tools? Additionally, what core computer science concepts might be emphasized or de-emphasized within their integration?
So this is a loaded question. This is a big one. I'll start with the first part. Do they have a place? Yes, and depends on the students. I teach middle school kids. I teach 10-year-olds how to code full script in Python. I get them coding in 9 weeks. And they code a lot. They write a lot. And the reason why my 6th graders are so successful at coding is because I sort of follow a principle and a philosophy outlined by Barbara Oakley, Learning How to Learn. It's that muscle memory. We write, we read, we write, we explore, we create, we write. And so there's really no place in that foundational level for me in my classroom for generative AI. As we progress over the schools in 7th and 8th grade, we start incorporating AI because there is a need. There is a foundational advantage to increasing the amount of AI in the classroom. I think it's Terry Sejanowski. I'm not exactly sure who. I think it's Terry Sejanowski. He was actually quoting, he's a cognitive science who actually worked with Barbara Oakley. And he was saying about AI is a reverse Turing kind of test situation. It mirrors your intelligence. So if we have a child, a 10-year-old child who knows zero about coding, who knows zero about AI, who doesn't really understand a lot about computers in general, trying to use AI to produce a product, their intelligence level, their knowledge, their background is not enough to decipher what comes back at them. They can't look for the problems. They're going to spend hours and hours saying, explain line 1, explain line 2. Where do I put this? I don't see it on my computer. And they can't find the vocabulary words to do that. Therefore, I fully, wholeheartedly believe that foundations are the key to jump-starting the understanding with AI. As we progress to like the 8th graders, every editor, except for the ones that are locally installed on our computer, have AI inside of them for free. I just found out 3 days ago, the one I used on Google Drive Colab has, do you want to use generative AI? I said, oh, great. There it is again. And it's okay for me because I know that when my 8th grade students produce something with generative AI and I question them, okay, I'm print out this sheet of paper. Tell me what's happening in this Python program. Will they know 100% of it? Probably not, but will they know over 50%? Will they know what the errors are, the syntax, the indentation errors? Will they be able to fix the problem or find code somewhere else where they can do it? Yes. So that's that generative place in computer science. But philosophical implications, again, muscle memory. When we are, as coders, we're constantly looking up. There's over 360 something thousand libraries in the Python package. I know maybe 50 of them. So I'm always looking up, but it slows down my efficiency. Now I go to ChatGPT or I go into generative AI and say, I need a library that's going to do X, Y, and Z. And it helps. So core concepts of computer science, 100%. We need that muscle memory. We need discussions. We need communication. We need practice. We need to move the stuff that's in our frontal lobe, our short-term memory, back into our long-term memory and make those neural connections. But then the sky's the limit. I tell my students, you're about to do something that's over your pay grade. Let's do it. Let's put generative AI in there. I want to see what amazing things you can create. And you know what? Who's the best creators in the world? They're kids before we kill the creativity. So that's my long-winded answer for that.
I don't know. Thank you. Crystal, I'm going to throw that same question your way. And it's a doozy of a question. Do generative AI tools have a place in computer science education? What are those philosophical implications of incorporating these tools, and what core computer science concepts might be emphasized or de-emphasized in their integration?
So I think that Kelly, you seeped into my brain and you pulled some things out that I would definitely say. So just not to repeat what she's saying. When we're talking about, I guess, does it have a place? Yes, I think we all kind of agree in some instances, yes. When we're using it as a replacement, I think that we can all agree that it's not okay. Just because students are not going to have the skills that they need to be successful long-term. You know, when you're talking to students that are interested in pursuing some sort of computer science related education or field or employment long-term, depending on generative AI, it's just going to kind of get you only so far. And so I think that one thing that we kind of forget sometimes, and it's kind of in a philosophical space, is that we get a little intimidated by devices, right? We think that because computers do things quickly, they do things better than we do. And that's not necessarily the case at all. It's just computers compute quickly. And so it just appears to be successful because sometimes we mark success by speed, right? And so I think that when we're trying to figure out like the where things fall, it's always like a gray area. It's always an icky space. When you're talking about emphasizing things or de-emphasizing components, I think it's per student, per educator, it looks different. And as we're talking about the ability for generative AI to improve that ability for us to do that individualized instructional component, we have to kind of be comfortable with the individualized instruction. Because if you have a phenomenal student that's been wanting to get to your class for years and they're ready to shine, you know, give them what they need to excel. But if we have to get in small groups and work with these students because they're having a little confidence issue or just a knowledge-based issue, then, you know, that's kind of where we kind of sit. So one of the things that we've talked about, especially I think when we first started bringing generative AI into an education space, is just using it to help us get back to direct student interaction and work. And so if we can use it that way, you know, I think it kind of works a little bit better. So that's kind of answering the question. It's kind of a trying to just kind of figure it out to where for each student, they're getting exactly what they need. I think that's the most important part.
Thank you. We have in our audience, Bree Kaplan from Code Your Dreams in Chicago. Not only is like, thank you so much. She's enjoying the panel discussion thus far, but it has this great question that kind of is aligned to this, you know, what steps can be taken to ensure that the benefits of generative AI and computer science are distributed equitably. And I wonder, Mohammed, if you don't mind me throwing that your way, or do you have any thoughts on that?
So the first thing that I would suggest to try to ensure that these resources are distributed equitably is to think about what is present and what is the motivation for companies who develop these tools. So at the present moment, if we just look at OpenAI's ChatGPT, there's a 3.5 version that's free for anyone. But then if you have the $20 a month, then you can pay for the 4.0 version. That's better. So already students who have the $20 a month to spare have access to a more powerful tool. So how do we fix that? Well, the motivation of these companies is to, of course, make money. They are in a space to generate as much revenue as possible. And in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. So how do we as citizens put pressure on these organizations to give access to public education so that they can utilize these tools to help give instruction to all students? Well, in my opinion, they want to replace some of the educational things that we value and have students learn so that there can be a pipeline from high school to the private sector for technology. So we can talk to our local districts and have companies that are near to our communities and ask them to provide resources and training. We can look at our state legislators and lobby them and ask them. We can look at federal grants that are available for research to be done in these spaces and bringing money into our communities where institutions of higher learning along with nonprofits can work together to bring about changes in the way that these tools are used in classrooms to provide sort of an exemplar that we can then take back to boards of education and state superintendents. So this always brings up in my mind the idea of how education really doesn't move like NVIDIA or OpenAI or Google. We have to move at a different space. And in order for us to do that, we as a community have to be educated about the layers and the bureaucracy so that we can figure out a way as citizens to work together to push in the direction that we want.
Thank you. Crystal or Kelly, anything you want to add to steps that we can be taken to ensure the benefits of generative AI in computer science are distributed equitably?
The thing that I think that comes to mind to add to what Mahmoud was saying was for everything that he's speaking about for the teachers as well, right? So we have a lot of educators that have been placed in spaces to teach computer science that never intended to teach it before, especially with a lot of states adopting a K-12 requirement, right? And then it's the same thing on top of this with using generative AI in learning spaces. And so as we are creating points of equitable access for students, we need to do the same with educators when it comes to training. You know, how are we going to support them learning a brand new tool on top of all the other things they have to do, all the other preps, all the other courses, all of the other new curricula and standards that keep switching, the standardized test? How are we going to make sure that they have what they need to support the students? And I think that that's an important point to carry along with what he was saying, especially when things are going super fast. There is a lot of pressure to use tools that educators don't understand. And so when we're not providing them with, you know, what they need to be successful, the same thing that we're fearful will happen with students will happen with educators. And so we know that if we can arm them with the knowledge, get them excited about using tools that are, you know, safe for everyone to use, you won't have to do much. The teachers will fight and they will advocate for their students to have access to things, especially when they understand, you know, how it works, why we should use it, and, you know, the outcomes that would help students. So definitely add educators in when we're talking about making things equitable.
100% for both of the answers. I'll go on to an easy side ish, right? Tap into the community. For me, I just learned Python 8 years ago. I was told you're going to teach Python, and I have zero background knowledge in computing. And there were people out there in the community that were really helpful, getting mentors. This is kind of the right reason why we started the Teaching Python podcast, because there's this opportunity to get the professional development for the teachers, like Crystal has said. And I would also say that we need to really pressure, like Mamu said, to get products to our kids to use. Some of the products I use are completely free. For example, Colab has generative AI built in. There is no charge for it. So these are opportunities we have to look for that allows students and schools without the means to really get coding into the curriculum. And I'll
Awesome. One thing I do want to acknowledge that I feel everyone here was talking about is the energy that teachers put into bringing this subject to their students. As both of you said, many of the teachers who teach computer science didn't start as computer scientists. They started as maybe business or math teachers, and yet they approached it, they are teaching it in their class, and now they're trying to understand, how can I better educate my students with new generative AI coming down the pipeline? As you were saying, teachers have a lot on their plate, and the fact that so many of them are doing this is just incredible. So.
And you know, from there, we'll continue. We've touched on this a little bit, and I'll start with you, Kelly. How might generative AI tools help or hinder the student's ability to learn the fundamentals of computer science, that is, including computational thinking, coding, and cybersecurity?
So I touched on it earlier, and if we're taking apart just code, fundamentally, there's a lot of syntax. It's like writing. It's if we say to a kindergartner who knows zero about writing, maybe knows their ABCs, and we say, here's this generative AI, it's going to teach you how to write. Go for it. They're going to look at it and say, what do I do? Okay, maybe they'll speak into it. How do I write? And then when it comes out, where do I put it? What do I say? How do I use this tone, this voice? There's so many things that foundationally, I think at least in the K-8 space, foundationally students need. So there's not an ability to completely replace learning with generative AI without someone pressing the go button. So for me, there's too many fundamentals with computer science to to just do that, right? Now with computational thinking, that's a different story for me. Coding is problem solving, and you know what? Using generative AI to get what you really want, to produce a product that's really functional, that you can solve problems with, that's a lot of computational thinking. And I think there are ways that you can finagle and use generative AI to do that. Cybersecurity, well, if you're using generative AI for cybersecurity, you have to know a little bit about cybersecurity in order to ask about cybersecurity. If you try to hack, you have to know how to prompt generative AI appropriately to actually convince it to give you the hack. Because it'll say, are you sure you want to do this? It's not quite the way you are doing it. So again, generative AI is going to mirror the intelligence. So I think when we're talking about anything foundational, that is surely not going to get replaced, in my opinion.
Thank you. And Crystal, what are your thoughts on how this can hinder students' abilities to learn those fundamentals when it comes to the full spectrum of computer science?
So I think that Kelly's answer was perfect. So I'm not going to necessarily answer it truly directly, but this is a thought that honestly just popped into my head. If our goal collectively as educators is to prepare students for the future, ultimately the future is going to be the workforce because the majority of us are going to work. If we make them reliant on a tool that requires humans to develop it without teaching them how to create and develop it, how are we going to sustain it? And so what I'm saying in a really convoluted way is this: generative AI as it stands today, in the future, who knows, is heavily dependent on people. Someone has to give it the data. Someone has to give it the algorithms in order for it to know to seek answers in this space to give you an output that works, right? But if we're not teaching students how to think computationally, how to build up their coding arsenal, how to understand the components of cybersecurity, and especially we can probably talk forever about misinformation that is presented to all of us by bots and things like that, right? But if we're not teaching students how to solve some of the issues that we have in computer science themselves individually, then what we have today in generative AI is going to be what we have permanently. And if we kind of think about what technology's purpose is overall, it's to improve the human condition. At one point in time, an abacus was the top thing in mathematics, right? And it was to help do mathematical computations faster. And of course, now we have calculators, computers, and things like that. But if the goal is to improve the human condition, but we stop teaching humans how to be technologists, how to build these things, then we're going to become stagnant. And I think that that is something to be concerned about, especially when we're talking about using generative AI in exclusivity to teach students skills that I think that we've all said time and time again are much better learned with a human input and human support and learning tenacity and the skills that it takes to build new things. So I think overall, when we're talking about some of the things that it can do, of course, we'll say that it can help students problem solve. Having a thought partner through a generative AI tool, I think, is extremely important. Learning how to give and take, learning how to fact check using generative AI tools, I think, is something essential that a lot of us as adults and students need. So being able to access creativity, because if tools are doing the technical part, it gives us a little bit of brain space to, be creative with what our outputs may look like. And then, of course, whenever we just push these tools without allowing students to test things and expand their minds and give them or push them into reliance, it becomes bad because they generally just don't understand how things work in a way to where they can improve them for us.
Okay. And Mahmoud, what are your thoughts when it comes to helping and hindering that student's ability to learn those fundamentals of computer science?
So I'm going to look at it from a slightly different perspective. I think the help and the hinder is really decided by the experience level of the instructor who has the tools available at their disposal. I strongly feel that there is a need for evaluation of how we are preparing new teachers to go into the classroom. As technology has manifested itself into generative AI, the way that we learn now is very different than even 4 years ago. And in order for a tool to be helpful, it has to be monitored and used by someone who's experienced. And I think in a vacuum, generative AI can be helpful or it can be a hindrance. It just depends on how the individual instructor is deciding to use the tool. And I'm a big proponent of instruction. And one thing that I think, if it were me and I could just infuse one thing into all pre-service education programs, is the ability to take your content and use data and information with technology that you learn how to implement with generative AI at least a few times in an academic year. So if I'm a history teacher, but I don't really know the ins and outs of Excel, but Excel can really help me look at data around perhaps some historical event like the Great Depression. I now can put AI to work to help me use and learn Excel so that my students can learn the tool. And then I, as a teacher, understand how to manipulate data and make visualization. And I instruct my students to do that. And if they can't do it in Excel, then generative AI can show them how to do it. And now the AI has a purpose. The purpose is to teach me Excel so I can investigate data around the Great Depression in a social studies class. So all of those things can't just come together because we say we want it to help. Teachers have to have opportunities to work in that space. And that is sort of a roundabout way of me saying that it can do both, but in order for it to help, we need to empower the instructor.
Thank you, all of you. Actually, your answer there kind of led to one of our attendees' questions. In the chat, they posted, "What recommendation do you have for a classroom teacher using AI to bring culturally responsive resources in areas of science and social studies?" So not necessarily computer science, but outside those realms. So you kind of alluded to that question. I want to open that up to either Kelly or Crystal to ask you, what are your thoughts?
Crystal, would you like to go first?
Oh, no, you go first. Take it away.
So science and research with can you repeat just the last bit so I can make sure I get that? Oh, do you have for
Sure.
classroom teachers using AI to bring culturally responsive resources in areas of science? Culturally responsive. Wow. That is a great question, Mahmoud. I'm going to pass it just for you.
So culturally responsive to me is dependent upon the context in which the student lives or the context in which the content area is learning. So for example, in science, if I'm learning about in events that led to discoveries in medicine, perhaps if I'm in the South region, I may want to learn about the Tuskegee experiment. But if I use AI to give me a summary of what the Tuskegee experiment is, then I can have students fact check that with other resources. So the AI gives me a start. And now as the instructor, I can break students into groups and say, each piece of this response, let's now find other resources that either say that in support or are in denial of what is being said by this response. So, in my opinion, we can't depend on AI for culturally responsive resources. We can use AI to kick us off, but then we have to utilize techniques from our content area. So I know that in social studies in particular, there is a way that they vet different resources to sort of construct what happened in historical events when no one is alive who was at the event. And so now you have a reason for students to learn these methods. And then you can even use AI to explicate those methods even more. But then at some point, the student will have to do some research on their own to sort of bring it all together.
And sorry, I dropped. I want to add on to that. Thank you, Mahmoud. um, I agree that at some point you have to move. I'm thinking of a course I just took with Andrew Ning, NG, and the way that he structured this course, it's Python for everybody. I did not take the course to learn Python because I already know it, but it was how to use AI chatbot with Python. And I think if you're in a science classroom or an English classroom or a humanities classroom, if you take this course and skim through it, if you don't want to learn Python, that's fine. But skim through it and see how he in that course guide the student for the prompt. So I think if you can incorporate a way where you have your topic, you have the direction. Again, you're the intelligent person in the classroom. You're the facilitator of knowledge for your students. You're the guide to enhance their learning. If you can find ways that they structure their prompts and structure their direction, you can embed ways to get them to talk about their culture, give them their voice. But again, you have to be careful because it depends on your age level, right? So what are you using?
You know, both of you got to a great point. Talking about maybe you begin the conversation with a question to ChatGPT, and how it also gets to the idea that the answer is not always right from ChatGPT. That can actually lead to a fantastic lesson about we need to fact check what we're hearing out in the media, what we're hearing from AI. We can't take everything at face value anymore. We really have to dive in and make sure we're using accurate sources for the material that we're learning about. And Crystal, I saw you were about to cut in. I apologize for cutting you off there.
Oh no, but that was a great point that feeds into my point. Also, one thing I would encourage is just not shying away from the conversation. Because of the digital divide, because of all of the issues that exist when it comes to marginalized people in education, if you're working with students that fall into any of those categories, especially with age, they're aware, right? They know that some things look shiny and brand new in one place, but maybe not for them, or maybe vice versa. And so be comfortable with having these conversations with students. If you're looking to use a generative AI tool to pull your starting point data, like Mahmoud was mentioning, have that deep discussion, have even a debate, if you will, to discuss why is it that all of this information is available for this instance, but not this one? Why are we pushed more to fact check? Of course, you should fact check everything, but why should we have to fact check even more information about marginalized groups over others? And it comes into a conversation about access to data, accurate data, complete data for these groups of people, and how these tools that are using the internet in its entirety to answer our questions may not always give factual information. I think shying away from the issue of equity, the issue of culturally relevant and responsive content is something that we should not do. once again, with age, right students, right environment to where everyone's comfortable about having these conversations. And so in my experience, having these types of discussions with students honestly propels them to want to change things and to advocate in their own way about how things should look different and should look equitable for everyone. So it's almost like a Socratic seminar style where you just get the basic information, throw it out there, and really kind of see what your students come up with. And I've done similar things before generative AI with students, and I've never not been just amazed and blown away by the solutions they develop, their thoughts, their frustrations, and all of those things. So just open it up for conversation, and I think it would be some really, really great results.
Wonderful. So before we wrap up our webinar, I do want to open up to you all. Do any of you have questions for the other panelists that are here? Good. Please.
So this is for both Kelly and Crystal from two different perspectives of the same idea. So Kelly, you mentioned about your struggle to get up to speed, and you talked about the support systems. And so I just want you to maybe explicate moments where you felt, okay, I feel like I'm now getting over the hump and really starting to propel, and what made you feel that way at that moment. And Crystal, if you can take the same question and think about the teachers that you've worked with, when have you seen that light finally shine, like, oh, I'm getting it now, I do feel like I can do it?
It's a great question, because I remember the moment I was actually sitting in the classroom watching my co-teacher, my co-host. He's a Carnegie Mellon University student, never taught before, but he's a coder, and he was teaching functions. And he sat there and he explained it. And this is probably the 10th time he's taught functions to the students. And all of a sudden I looked at him and went, oh, and the light, he goes, you just got functions. And I said, yes, I just did. But it's because I had this mentor, this friendship with somebody in the classroom. I think as teachers, we go into our classroom, we shut the door, and we are expected to know everything by ourselves and do the best that we can for our students. And that's hard. So for me, if we're going to really help teachers become hopefully Pythonistas, because that Python's my favorite, Pythonistas or data scientists, we need to have people there with them. Not 24/7, but 15 hours a day in the classroom, with somebody to talk to. We can't just say, hey, you're going to teach computer science and off you go. That just doesn't work. In addition, in the Python community, after starting the podcast, we just had an outpouring of community support. If you ever want to know a loving community, go to a Python event. And I think, again, as an educator, having that welcoming, knowing that you're safe to make silly questions and make mistakes, that really helps you improve as a learner. And we need to give that the opportunity for teachers, because teachers are afraid to make mistakes because there's too many consequences. And so we need to also give them that opportunity to make those mistakes and learn, because we learn from our mistakes. I could go on and on, but I know we're short on time, so I'll stop.
Okay, so I love the point you made about just giving them an opportunity to learn and to make mistakes, because that feeds right into my little story. One of my most recent really, really moments of success came through our AI fellowship that I was able to host with educators across my state. One of my educators is super, super experienced, like well over 20 years. And so she felt a little concerned about her ability to pick up all of the things that we were sharing and the information. She's like, I'm just an older teacher. And I'm like, no, wait, you're here. That's all I need you, to do is to be here. And so we actually decided, kind of sort of on a whim, to give them a little experience with physical computing. and starting out super easy with microbits, right? Because microbits are pretty straightforward. They're reasonably priced. We had a sponsor. We were able to send them out, and we took one of the lessons from Machine Learning for Kids, the website where you were building the facial, oh gosh, what do they call on social media? The facial thing.
Facial recognition? No.
It was with facial recognition,
Okay.
but it was the oh gosh, you know, you put
Filters?
the filters. Thanks. Oh, it's the end of the day. So one of the face filter projects that's already on the website, you know, we did a little tweaking, made it, you know, applicable for students. And so we are all unfortunately not in person. So we were all across the state, everyone's at home working through what I was sharing. And then she has, like, just like you described, an aha moment where she's like, I got it to work. Like I can see my face and it's moving with my face. And I was just like, huh. Just because it was a moment where I was talking to her as well as others in the fellowship. I just want you to just stick with me, right? I know that you're going to have success. If you were not interested in building your skill set and becoming a better educator, you would have not applied. You would not be here. So since you're motivated to learn, please just, you know, just push with me and we're going to get there. And so that definitely most recently is one of my super high achieving moments, because she was able to take the little bit that we did with microbits, the little bit we did with facial recognition, and now she's talking to her computer science teacher. Mind you, she's the ELA teacher in middle school. And she is working with someone completely in a different field to create cross-curricular instruction for students. And I'm just like, this is exactly, you know, when I envision things, this is exactly what I envisioned. I thought of you. And so she, of course, thinks it's hilarious, but I just, something about educators in general that I just admire, that how I think we collectively are always adamant about making sure that we can be our best version of our best selves so we can provide the best for our students. And I think that when we talk about why so much of our conversation has been, no, you can't get rid of the human element when we're talking about education. Of course, computer science is essential when we're talking about doing these things. It's because a lot of the times we need us, the community, the people, the interactions, the relationships to make a lot of this work. And so that's my little piece.
All of the points were just wonderful, and it reminds me, we work a lot with teachers who are just starting out in computer science, and we seek out that aha moment, because teachers are not just, when they're in those workshops, they're not just learning the computer science, they're learning, how do I get my student to that aha moment as well? So I need to get there so that I can bring my students there. So as we begin to wrap up the webinar, we want to look a little bit at the data. So now that we've heard, we're going to look a little bit at that data. In a recent study, it was found that code produced by generative AI can actually be inaccurate, contain security vulnerabilities and biases. In another study, students were asked about their experience with using generative AI in a computer science course, and they stated that while ChatGPT was able to produce answers quickly, it led students to get in the habit of relying on the tool and abandon thinking for themselves, significantly reducing the learning effects. But combining generative AI with computer science education can also lead to beneficial results. In a study of students who used ChatGPT while learning to program, students found it most beneficial in correcting code, answering programming questions, and providing examples of code. The one thing that was notably absent was they weren't seeking the answer from the ChatGPT. Computer science education also led students to receive far better results when using ChatGPT. In a study of grade school students, researchers found that those students with greater programming fluency benefited more than their peers while using generative AI tools. Another study concluded that teaching with and about AI in computer science classrooms can promote critical thinking, demystify AI tools, and equip students to use those tools responsibly. So this quote from Teach AI and CSTA does a wonderful job of answering the question on whether we should continue to teach computer science in schools. Computer science is more than the simple act of coding. It involves teamwork among students, critical thinking and problem solving, creativity and personal expression. Much like music, art, and creative writing, computer science can provide students with an opportunity to create something unique or expressive or even solve a problem. Generative AI can be an incredible tool to help students on their educational journey, and the studies have shown that computer science education can help students produce even more impressive results with generative AI. But just as these tools cannot replace a visual artist, musician, or reporter, they cannot replace the creative mind of our students in the computer science classroom. So I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists for the incredible conversation, your incredible points that you were able to make answering those questions, and also for answering some of those questions on the fly from our audience. I know that we kind of threw you some curveballs there, and I really appreciate the responses that you were providing. So thank you all very much. I'm going to hand it back to Emma Broughton to close us out.
Thank you, Russell and Jackie. I'll just echo what you shared there. I was cheering and nodding and agreeing and so excited to be a participant and learning from these leaders in computer science and hearing their perspectives on AI and what that looks like for the future of our classrooms. And I have just dropped into the chat for everyone a feedback survey. If you could share your responses, or if you'd like some follow-up from the Friday Institute, there's some question there for you. Again, just a huge round of applause. Kudos to Kelly, Mahmoud, and Crystal for sharing and extending some of your time this evening to be with us. We do have more sessions in this series, Real Issues, Real Data. I've also posted the link in the chat there if you're interested. Our next topic in September is going to be on cell phones in schools and what that looks like with students, what policies we should be thinking about from the school district and state perspectives. We're hearing a lot about that in the headlines. There's lots of conversations in states across the country. That will be an in-person event at the Friday Institute. Would love to have you join us. But either way, all the resources from tonight and our other series sessions will be posted on our website, so you can check them out there. Just again, thank you to Russell and Jackie for your leadership, for pulling this together and picking such phenomenal experts and speakers. I just am super excited to be able to learn and be a part of it. Hope everybody has a great night, and we'll connect soon. Thanks, everyone.